I'm going to say it was 15 years ago that I had this beloved sweater. It was one of the last gifts that my grandmother gave me before she passed. And it was this really scratchy wool sweater, but it was so warm. And I loved it so much. And I remember one year packing it away and then the next winter pulling it out. And I realized that there was a hole that had formed in it. And I wondered if it was moths. I mean, I don't even think that's a thing anymore, is it? Like, do moths still get into clothes apparently? Or maybe it had been there the previous season, I don't know, and I just hadn't noticed it. But in any case, I really wanted to keep this sweater. And so I asked a friend who is into fiber arts if she would be able to patch it. And she did patch it. And I wore it that season. And after a couple of months, it seemed to be holding up. But after a couple of months went by, I did start to notice that around the edges, around the border of that patch, it had started to fray again. The damage was too great, and the patch could not repair it. The story of Esau, Isaac, and Jacob is a fascinating one, I think. I remember learning about this back when I was a little kid. This was a Sunday school lesson for sure. And the story is really quite curious. So Jacob is the younger of the twin brothers and knows that Esau is going to inherit the lion's share of Isaac's, land and title and all of that. And so Esau is going to be the inheritor. And Jacob is quite jealous of this. And so he conspires with his mother to attempt to take the birthright for himself. His mother favors Jacob over Esau and is happy to help in this plot. And so what happens? Jacob overhears Isaac say to Esau, "Go out into the woods and hunt. And when you bring back some game, cook us a meal, and over the meal I will bestow upon you your blessing and your birthright." And Esau goes forth to hunt. Jacob, in the meantime, plots to cook a meal for his father and go in and disguise himself like Esau. Now, how is he going to disguise himself like his older brother? Well, Isaac's eyesight is failing him at this point. And so the only way that Isaac can distinguish the two brothers is that Esau is apparently the hairier one. And so Isaac plots to put animal skin, like furs, over his skin so that if Isaac reaches out to touch Jacob, he will feel the fur and think that it is Esau. And so Jacob, with the help of his mother, cooks this meal, goes in to Isaac. Isaac reaches out and grabs him and feels the fur and then bestows the birthright. And Jacob is the one to inherit all that Isaac has to give. What is curious to me about this story is that there's this perception that when we pick up the Bible, whether it's the Hebrew scriptures or the Christian scriptures, that we're going to get a compendium of moral tales, stories that have this neat outcome that has a message in it, like do not lie, do not steal, do not cheat, do not murder, do not harm. But we can only hold on to that perspective on these ancient on this ancient text if we don't ever pick it up and read it. Because these stories are full of people who behave very badly, and sometimes they get their comeuppance, but sometimes they don't. And in this story, Jacob does not get his comeuppance. Instead, he is the one to inherit everything that Isaac has to give. And so you kind of walk away from this thinking, what is it supposed to be? Is it a tragedy? Is it a comedy? What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to feel pity for Isaac and, his sort of foolishness and, bestowing this birthright on the wrong person? Are we supposed to feel bad for Esau, who was tricked? Are we supposed to feel some kind of niggling admiration for Jacob and his cunning and his deceit? I don't know. We're just sort of left with the question. We're left with having to grapple with those things. And then I would say that isn't too far off from how we might have to grapple with things today out in our world. We have so many instances of situations in the world in which lying, deceit, fraud has happened, and those people seem to have been rewarded because of their fraud, because of their deceit. These stories just paper the headlines. I mean, I'm thinking about Sam Bankman-Fried in the FTX Bitcoin downfall that we're seeing, where he, defrauded people of millions. Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, Billy McFarland, who was, I feel like that's one of the more comedic ones. He was the one who created the Fire Festival, where he presented it as it was going to be this luxurious music festival, and people ended up in FEMA tents with ham sandwiches on white bread. All of these people defrauded others of sometimes millions and millions of dollars. And so it's this question of what do we do with that? And then I haven't even mentioned the story that is topmost in my mind today, and I imagine is topmost in many of your minds right now. I just saw another story about this in The Guardian this morning. I mean, there's a new one released every day. George Santos, right? George Santos lied about pretty much his entire life story. I mean, from the profound, from saying something as profound as that his mother died in 9/11 when she didn't, all the way to the utterly trivial, saying that he won a volleyball championship in high school and had to have a knee replacement because of it, neither of which happened. And where is he today? Where is he today, right? He's in Congress. You might imagine telling this story to, a younger person, a child, and that he lied about all of these things and da 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 da, and then the child asking well, what happened to him? He went to jail, right? No, he's in Congress. So a lot to grapple with here. This week, I decided to read a book by Sam Harris. He is a neuroscientist, and he wrote a book called Lying. And he gives one of the most stringent defenses of truth-telling and really pushes against notions that we should rely on lying, or that we can rely on lying as a strategy for living a good life. And I agree with a lot of what he has to say. Sometimes I think he goes a bit too far. Jonathan and I met with the coming of age youth, the affirmation youth, and we had a conversation about truth and lying and when and if it's okay to lie. And, they were quite perceptive. They noticed that there are some times where it is probably morally praiseworthy to lie. There's famous examples. One is presented by the philosopher Immanuel Kant, that if a murderer shows up at your door and you're harboring someone and the murderer says, "Do you know where this person is?" Lying in that instance might be the right thing to do. Now, Kant actually said it wasn't, and that's a whole other conversation. We can talk about Kant another time, but he acknowledged that many people's moral intuition would be that lying in that instance is the right thing to do. And then there's also just the reality that many of us lie on a day-to-day basis. This comes out of research. They have done research on this, and they estimate that people tell an average of 4 lies a day. I'm not sure how they figured that out, but 4 lies a day. And many of these are in the much more trivial category. Do you like my hat? Do you like my tie? Like, sparing someone's feelings. Or another one, avoiding a social situation. I'm feeling under the wet weather. I can't come to your party. That kind of thing. So Sam Harris gives a really virulent defense of truth-telling even in those instances. And he has certain worries that people in those situations, if they rely on lying, that the people in their lives will start to assume that they can't trust that person. I don't know if that's true. I don't know. Because I think that, if I found out you told me that you liked my tie, and then later on I found out that you didn't really, and that you were just trying to give me kind of a morale boost, I might have compassion for that and understand where you were coming from, right? I don't know. We can have a conversation about whether it's okay to lie in a situation like that. But what we're seeing in the headlines is far beyond that, right? We're not talking about these little trivial lies. Instead, we're looking at major deceptions where people defraud others out of significant sums of money and do other things that are quite destructive and criminal. Now, one of the defenses that people will sometimes give, and I know I've heard this plenty, is the defense that everybody does it. And if I am to succeed in politics or business or some other field, law, I'm going to have to do it too. I think it should give us pause when we hear that defense. I think we should pause when we hear that defense, because that defense is sometimes, maybe even often, used by people who do some truly heinous things. I can think of one example in particular. Last week, I watched a documentary about Keith Raniere, who founded a cult that abused people, that defrauded people of millions, really destructive stuff that was happening there. And one of the members of that cult at one point said, "How can we do all of these incredibly unethical things while thinking that we're the good people?" And his response was, "The world is complicated and dark. And so we have to be cunning in order to navigate it." And he used that to justify some truly heinous behavior. And so I'm quite skeptical of that as an excuse for lying. Another philosopher who's really inspired my thinking around this is Cecil Bach. And her book is quite old at this point, but I think continues to be quite relevant still, and it is called Lying. She is a moral philosopher. I read her book back in my undergraduate, and the way that she talks about it, she has a critique. She has a critique of the idea that the people who really succeed in life are the ones who consistently lie, and especially the ones who tell big and destructive lies. And she gives this example that's stuck with me over the years. It's the house of cards example. She says that if you're in business, say, and you find that it's more expedient to tell a particular lie, you can probably balance two cards like this and kind of prop that lie up. She said that what you then might discover is that in order to keep that lie stable, you have to tell another lie. And so you build another part of that house. And then in order to avoid inconsistencies between those lies, you tell more lies. And before you know it, you have a quite elaborate structure that lacks soundness and the tenability to stand for a long period of time. She says that her hunch is that people who consistently tell big lies, destructive lies, often end up living a life that goes from one implosion on to the next. One implosion on to the next. Because at some point, people are going to notice enough inconsistencies, the house of cards will fall, and then that person is going to have to go to another group of people who aren't familiar with all of this and start over from scratch. So, are the people who lie the ones who have it easier? I don't know. At the very least, the jury's out on that. But I have skepticism and agree with Cecil Bach in kind of her analysis in many ways. And we might just bring this back to the case that we were discussing when we started this. George Santos, right? Is his lie a success? I mean, on the one hand, he's in Congress, right? If we were presenting this story to a young person and we were not able to say, well, he's in prison now, but that notion that the lies might actually crumble in on themselves, that there might be an implosion that is happening here. At the very most, he's got 2 years, right? And then he'll face another election. And I think the extent and depth of the lies that he has told will very likely sink whatever future political career that he has. And then it might happen even sooner than that, right? Because he has brought upon himself such scrutiny for all of his past dealings that people are starting to discover things that are potentially criminal. And he might be held accountable for those sooner rather than later. So perhaps that strategy of prolific lying might not be as successful as it first appears. It might be successful in the short term, but I'm not so sure about the long term. So I've been discussing lying from the perspective of interpersonal relationship and public life, what it does to our relationships, what it does to our trust with other people. But there's another angle to this, which is a spiritual angle. It's what happens when we lie to others, when we deceive others. What does that say about our own spiritual well-being, our own spiritual health, our own spiritual integrity? And for this, I rely on a concept that is present in Hindu philosophy. It's called satya. Satya is one of the yamas, one of the disciplines, one of the restraints, the ethical restraints that you should put upon yourself if you're to abide by an ethical life. And it translates as truthfulness, but it also translates as being. The notion here, by linking truthfulness and being, is that when we are able to be truthful with what our reality is, with who we are, with what our past is, with what our aspirations are, we are able to abide in the present moment without feeling torn apart or torn in different directions by the conflicts and inconsistencies that emerge with lying to others. There's a sense of spiritual wholeness that emerges when we're able to sit with the truth, when we're able to sit with our truth, when we're able to have truth in our dealings and our relationships. There is a sense of being that we can ground ourselves in. And when we are able to do this, when we're able to sit with this truthfulness, with this being, I think what happens is that we start to notice a difference in our lives that looks like the difference between a garment that is constantly fraying and coming apart and cannot be patched back together, and one that abides in its wholeness.